So as you heard in the introduction, so historically psychology has been all about correcting errors and figuring out what's wrong with people and how do we help people resolve those issues. That's certainly a very important part of what psychology is about. Strategies that we have to apply. In other words, happiness is not simply the opposite of unhappiness. We have to be thinking about that in a much more intentional way. So the field of positive psychology has an interest in self-care behaviors, things like exercise, sleep, taking time for gratitude, spending time in nature, surrounding yourself with caring people, taking time to journal, to meditate, asking for help when you need it, treating yourself to something special like chocolate. I can't imagine that this is new information to anybody. Nobody's looking at this saying, oh my God, that's amazing. I would have never guessed that those things are important for our well-being. But the reality is that very few people actually are in the habit of incorporating these behaviors into their lifestyle. And there's a reason for that. What do you think that the reason is that people will give to say why they don't do these things on a regular basis? Even though they know on an intellectual level that they're important. Please.
They don't have time.
They don't have time. Excellent. Yeah, that's a big one. That I wish I could do these things, but I just don't have the time. But the reality is that there are 24 hours in the day, and some of these are very, very easy to do. So in addition to not having enough time, what's another reason why people might not do them, even though they know that they're important? They're just too lazy. There's just other alternatives. Why should I go exercise for 30 minutes if I could watch TV for 30 minutes, or scroll through Facebook for 30 minutes, or do something else for 30 minutes? So ultimately, the ability to incorporate these really important behaviors into our life is due to something that we call willpower, which we define as the capacity to override impulses and temptations. The impulse to eat French fries instead of a salad is there, but in order to override the unhealthy option, go with something that's more healthy, we have to have willpower. Or as our friend Ziggy here says, it's not willpower I need, it's won't power. It's the ability to say, no, I'm not going to do this other thing so that I can do something that's much more healthy. Now, in all of the studies that we conduct, there's actually a very simple way that we can test how much willpower someone has, and it's kind of a human universal. It's something that a lot of people have difficulty overriding the temptation to do or to eat. That it doesn't matter how old you are, where you're from, most people have difficulty overriding this. Anybody want to guess what it is? It's chocolate chip cookies. So this is typically how we study this. We bring people into a lab, we put a plate of cookies in front of them, and then we say, don't eat these cookies. And their ability to override that impulse is a measure, ultimately, of their willpower. So there was a very famous study done many years ago, this is now decades old, where they did this with little kids. These kids were about 4 years old. They bring them into the lab, and there were different variations of it, but they would always give the kids a small number of cookies, and they would put them at the table in front of them and say, all right, here are your options. You can either eat the cookies that you have in front of you, and then I have to leave for a few minutes. If by the time that I get back, you have not eaten these cookies, you'll get double the amount of cookies. So you'll get a bigger reward if you can delay the impulse to eat what you have in front of you. Or if you want to eat just these cookies right now, you can have them, but then that's all you get. So these kids are brought in the lab, they're told you can have 2 cookies now or 4 when the experimenter returns. Again, different variations, sometimes it's 3 now and 6 later. The idea is that if you can delay gratification, you get a bigger reward later on. And there's always a bell right next to the plate of cookies, and they're told, when the temptation has become too great, when you've just given in, go ahead and ring that bell, and that's our signal that you're going to give up and you're going to eat the cookies right now. Well, there's a two-way mirror in these labs, which allows the researchers to have a video camera to record the strategies that these kids have when they're in the face of these wonderful cookies right in front of them, and the things that they do to avoid that temptation. As I mentioned, this is now decades-old research, so the original studies were done in the 70s and 80s. So I'm actually going to show you some of the footage that they have from this. Because this is a little bit old at this point, it's a little bit grainy, but it does give you an idea of the things that these kids do when presented with the opportunity to have the cookies. I tried to embed the video to provide it a delay like last time. We're going to see if my technology skills are any good. Oh, I think it's loading. Oh, good. that last little girl, she's not messing around. She's decided she's done, and she's, I hope we don't have to watch this again. Is there a way to advance it to the next slide without watching the movie again? Oh, that did it. All right, cool. All right, so the original studies, again, were done in the 70s and 80s. Well, those kids are now in their 30s and 40s. So that has positioned these researchers to follow up with them, to see how did these kids, based on their performance on this task at age 4, how did that correlate with their performance academically, with the kinds of friendships that they had as they were growing up, with other behavioral outcomes? Well, this was a longitudinal study, and what they find is that the amount of time that the kid was able to wait from the time the experimenter left the room to the time that the child either ate the cookies or hit the bell correlated with the following. So the amount of time they delayed gratification correlated with their grades in grade school, high school, and college. The longer they were able to wait, the higher GPA they had. Their SAT scores, they got into better colleges. Their social networks, they had higher quality friendships, and behavioral conduct. If you look at how frequently they got detention when they were in school, or how many speeding tickets they got in adulthood, all of those things correlated with the amount of time that those kids waited before they rang the bell, before they gave in to that temptation. What that is telling us is that it's consistent with this body of research on personality coherence, that you can look at behavioral characteristics of a very young child and find manifestations of that over the course of the life of the individual. So this is telling us that willpower is something that is really, really important, and that if you have good willpower in one aspect of your life, it corresponds to willpower that's necessary in other aspects of your life. Because the same psychological mechanism that's necessary for delaying the gratification of eating the cookies is the same willpower that's necessary to delay the gratification to watch TV and instead focus on your studies, or to follow the rules that are expected of you. So the question then became, what affects how much willpower we actually have? Given that willpower is something that's really important for incorporating good behaviors into our lives, what actually affects how much willpower we have available to us? So there was another study done in the 90s by a scientist named Roy Baumeister. He was a social psychologist, and one of the things you should know about social psychology is that you can never trust what a social psychologist tells you they're studying, because, well, who can tell why? Please.
Is it based on observations?
Yeah, so it's often based on observations, and what's going to happen if I tell you the actual purpose of my study? Can I help her out? The Hawthorne, okay, so part of it is the Hawthorne effect, that the simple act of observing people could change their behavior. That's very good. But what else?
Placebo.
The placebo effect, exactly. So if you come into my lab and I tell you, doing 5 jumping jacks is going to make you happier, now do 5 jumping jacks, then I ask you to fill out a happiness scale, and then suddenly you're happier. It could be just the fact that I primed you to believe that that behavior was going to lead to happiness. So social psychologists will often have some cover story that's not really the purpose of what they're studying. So Baumeister, who's actually a social psychologist, tells the people in his lab that day, we study taste perception. So we're going to ask you to taste some particular kinds of food, and then we're going to give you some other tasks to see how you do on them. Well, what's the thing he's probably going to have to taste, given what we've seen today? Cookies, yeah, because whether you're 4 or 24 or 84, people like cookies. So he tells the participants, don't eat anything at least 3 hours before the experiment, and he would always schedule the experiment for like 11 or 12 o'clock, like right in the middle of the day. Well, for college students who usually are waking up around 9 o'clock, especially if you don't have class until later, what's that going to mean when people walk into the lab? They're going to be extremely hungry. So imagine, you're a 19-year-old college student, you haven't eaten anything all day, you're extremely hungry, and you walk in, and wafting through the air is the aroma of freshly baked cookies. And there's a big, delicious plate of these fresh out of the oven, wonderful cookies. And right next to the cookies, anybody want to guess what's sitting right next to the cookies? Oh, milk. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be great? No, it's actually something very different from cookies. It's a big bowl of radishes. So there's, yeah, that's exactly the reaction people have. When they love the cookies, they don't like the radishes. Remember, this is a taste test study. So there were 2 conditions. In one condition, the participants are told, for the next 5 minutes, we want you to eat as many of these cookies as you want to. You can eat all of them, you can eat one of them, you can eat as many as you comfortably can, but do not eat the radishes. Please don't eat the radishes. The radishes are for other people, but we just happen to have them out. Don't eat the radishes. Well, the other condition, it was reversed. So again, you walk in the lab, you're hungry, you smell the cookies, but you're told, don't eat these cookies, whatever you do not eat these cookies. You have been assigned to eat these radishes, and then we're going to ask you to answer some questions about the radishes later on in the experiment. So people are spending 5 minutes tasting samples from their assigned dish. Now, the first thing they find, because again, they have a hidden camera, they're watching everybody do this. I don't have the footage of that, unfortunately. But I've talked to the scientist who did this. He said, first of all, everybody actually followed the instructions. So if they were assigned to eat the cookies and not the radishes, that was no difficulty. Everyone did that. But even the people who were in the condition to eat the radishes and not the cookies, people followed those instructions as well. Although he said that there were 1 or 2 people, even though they ate the radishes, there were a few people who would take a nice big whiff of the cookies, or he said that one person actually took the cookies, again, fresh out of the oven, and just let them sit in his hand for a couple minutes, and then put the cookie back, but licked the chocolate off of his hand. So technically he wasn't eating the cookies, but he was still able to have a little bit of the chocolate. So again, this is not actually a study of taste perception. This is done by a social psychologist. What this actually is studying came in the next part of the experiment. So they taste their food for 5 minutes, then they're told, okay, we have to give you a little bit of a break because we have to wait for your palate to be cleansed. So we're going to give you this puzzle to solve just to pass the time. This is really meaningless, but we're just going to give you something just to help you let the next part of the experiment pass. So they were given these instructions. Trace this geometric figure without retracing any lines and without lifting your pencil from the paper. Well, some of the shapes looked like this. Would anybody want to try to trace these? A lot of you are shaking your head no. These are actually impossible to solve. So he's actually giving them an impossible task. What do you think he was actually testing? What was the dependent variable? Frustration. And how might he measure that? Excellent. Yeah, you guys both have it exactly correct. That he's looking at the number of times they're trying this, because again, he's observing this, as well as how much time they're devoting to it before they give up. Because they also are given a bell, and they're told, when you've decided that you're done, that you're ready to move on to the next part of the experiment, go ahead and ring this bell, and that lets us know that you don't want to try these shapes anymore, and that you're ready to move on to the next part of the experiment. Well, this obviously was not a puzzle just to pass the time. This was the most important variable that they were measuring, and they specifically wanted to see how many trials would they take. So if they didn't get it this way, would they start over and try again? And then they're also looking at how much time they spent overall. The question that they were answering here is willpower a finite resource? In other words, if you expend willpower in one aspect of your life, do you actually have less remaining for other tasks in other areas of your life? And here were the results. So he's looking here at how many minutes, how long they take before they give up, as well as the number of trials. How many times do they go back? If they don't get it right the first time, how many times are they willing to go back and try it again? And sure enough, it's the people who had been eating chocolate in the first part of the experiment and not eating the radishes, they go back and they are willing to put in more effort into that task, versus the people who ate the radishes, they're giving up much more quickly and much more easily. Who can explain this in terms of what we're talking about here, in terms of whether willpower is a finite resource?
I think because they were more satisfied with the chocolate, and they didn't have to, like, with the people with the radishes, they had to resist the chocolate chip cookies. So, I mean, if it says that willpower is finite, then since they use their willpower in, like, not eating the chocolate cookies, maybe they can't have enough willpower for the.
That's exactly right. You hit the nail right on the head. And that is, so you said it better than I can. So is willpower a finite resource? The answer is yes, and it's for precisely the reason that you stated. The idea is that when willpower had been depleted earlier in the experiment, less remained for the subsequent puzzle task. So when people are put into a situation where they have to use a lot of willpower to override that impulse, remember that's built into the definition of willpower, the ability to override the impulse to eat the chocolate chip cookie, or the impulse to quit the task when it becomes really difficult, there's going to be less willpower that remains for other parts of the experiment. Anybody running cross country? You are. Have you ever had a race or some other long run where that you've had to train for it? What's the longest distance you've run?
10K.
10K. Okay, so it's about 6 miles. So the first time that you did that, so did you have a training schedule where you would start with maybe a couple miles, and the next week you'd add a mile, or get longer and longer?
I just went for the full thing every time.
Oh, you just went for the, okay, so you didn't have to train, you just sort of went for it. Wow, okay. My hat is off to you. Has anybody ever had, or any other athlete where you've had to train for, and get progressively stronger over time? You have? Okay, can you tell us what, so what sport do you, oh, I guess I can read your shirt. Varsity tennis is your, okay, what do you do the day before a really huge, really important game?
Practice.
Okay, practice serves. All right, so this is not going the direction I intend. Okay, so I'll tell you so I once trained for a half marathon. But so for tennis, it might be a little bit different. But for running, usually, like if you're training for a marathon, like a full or a half, usually, you start with a couple miles, and then each week you add a mile, and you're running so many. But the week before the race, what do you think they tell you to do? You don't do anything, and why not? That's exactly right. You have to replenish all the energy that you lost, and what would happen if you decided to help a friend move, or you ran 10 miles a day before you had to run a half marathon? What's going to happen on race day? You're going to be really exhausted because your muscles are going to be tired. The same thing happens on a psychological level, in much the same way that if the muscles in our bodies become tired, we are less capable of using our muscles for other tasks that we have to do. Same thing psychologically. If we expend our willpower muscles in one aspect of life, we have less remaining for other aspects of life. Yeah?
They're like a willpower hormone.
Is there a willpower hormone? I don't know if there's a willpower hormone. I haven't seen it myself. There are regions of the brain that have been associated with willpower, but I don't know if there's a willpower hormone specifically.
Yeah, so like when we have a test the next day, so we study, but then the next days, it happens sometimes that you don't remember anything. Why?
Okay, so that's an excellent question, and that's also tapping into the domains of learning and memory. And one of the things that we know about learning and memorying is that cramming is not a great thing to do if you want to retain information in the long run. So a much more effective strategy is to start a little bit earlier. And one of the best things you can do for yourself when you have to remember a large amount of information, I don't know if anybody was in AP Bio earlier, we talked about this a little bit, was anybody there? What's so important for our ability to consolidate memories and have it store is sleep. Giving yourself a full night's sleep. Because I use the analogy that sleep is like hitting the save button on the work that you've done the day before. And it's important especially to do that in small chunks over a long period of time, where it's trying to cram everything in your head right before a test. It's not going to be in there as well as it might be otherwise. Yeah, good question. Was there another hand up over here? Okay. So there's also been research looking into how depleting willpower in one aspect of people's lives can affect their other aspects of their lives, including some famous people who have made some really bad mistakes in their personal lives. There's probably another politician I could put up here more recently, but I didn't. I actually put these slides together for you guys before some tapes had been released a couple of weeks ago. But when researchers have, and this is not to condone anybody's behavior, this is simply to say that the fact of the matter is that people are most likely to make mistakes in their personal lives if they've got a lot of other stressors going on that's depleting their willpower, so they have less ability to override other impulses that present themselves. Or there's been research looking at the likelihood that physicians make mistakes when they're on the job. Again, they're most likely to occur when there's other stressors going on in other aspects of their lives. Who knows who this is? Mark Zuckerberg, of course. Anybody know who he's speaking to in this picture? Okay, it's actually a trick question. You can never tell what Mark Zuckerberg is doing just based on what he's wearing, because every single day he wears the same gray t-shirt and blue jeans. No matter where he is, no matter who he's speaking to, doesn't matter. And someone once asked him, what's up with that? Why you wear the same thing? I mean, here he's actually speaking to CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and here he is that weekend taking a walk in the park with his wife. Someone said, why do you wear the same thing every single day? Anybody know what he said? Yeah, well, because he wants to, but there's actually a reason that kind of ties into what we've been talking about here.
It's like one less decision he has to stress out.
That's exactly right. That any sort of judgment and decision-making process is one that requires willpower. And he doesn't want to waste his willpower on meaningless stuff. He wants to save it all for his business. So here's what he said. I really want to clear my life to make it so that I have to make as few decisions as possible about anything except how to best serve this community. Even small decisions like choosing what to wear, what to eat for breakfast could be tiring and consume energy, and I don't want to waste any time on that. Now, I also think that there's something about happiness about just like variety and introducing different things, so you have to sort of choose your battles here. But a lot of highly successful people try to minimize any of the small decision-making processes that they have so that they have more available for stuff they deem to be more important. I also like to make fun of our chancellor who does this. So this is Mark Wright, the chancellor of Washington University, and he wears a double-breasted suit no matter where he is. So here he's talking to Board of Trustees, here he's at a faculty meeting. This is freshman move-in day, so he's wearing sunglasses and a cape that they gave him, like get people excited, but with a double-breasted suit. Here he is having lunch at Steak and Shake on a Sunday afternoon, wearing a double-breasted suit. So he wears the same thing every day, but he's a very effective leader. All right, so to build willpower, because this is something that's important for all of us to do, you want to make sure that you're not wasting it on the menial tasks. So stuff like responding to email, having, if you have to fill out petty paperwork and stuff like that, try to save that until later on in the day when you've accomplished your more important tasks, because you don't want to waste your good willpower, your good energy on that stuff. Let me just check the time. How are we doing? So do we end at 2:30? Okay, so we've got a little more time. All right, so you want to ask yourself, what are the most important tasks in your day that require willpower? What are the unimportant tasks that will still require willpower? Things like grocery shopping, other decision and judgment-making processes. Those are your radishes. Those are the things that if you spend all of your time on this, you're putting yourself in the condition where you're eating the radishes and not eating the cookies. So again, you just want to be mindful of the timing of all of that. So the other thing that I want to talk to you about, was there a question? No, okay, that's fine. All right, so the question though is, how far does this analogy extend? As long as willpower is a muscle, if willpower is good, if willpower will predict our grades, our social relationships, behavioral issues, then are there things that we can do to work out that willpower muscle, to make it become stronger in the future? Well, it turns out that the answer to that is yes. So there was a study from a number of years ago where they took a large group of people and they randomly assigned them to two conditions. In one condition, they enrolled people in an exercise program. So 3 times a week, these people had to meet with personal trainers, and they had this very regimented schedule that ensured that they were getting exercise on a regular basis. So for both the people in this condition as well as the people in the control condition, they were also looking at all these other behaviors. So they were looking at their dietary habits, if they were eating healthy, nutritious foods or always going for the junk food option, self-care behaviors, like whether they were getting other kinds of exercise, whether they were flossing their teeth. They looked at their spending habits, were they buying a lot of impulse things at the grocery store or online. Emotional control, they looked at how frequently they lost their temper, how happy they were keeping appointments. They looked at whether they were on time for class, on time for doctor's appointments, and then also their study habits. So a lot of them were students, and so they looked at how much time they were able to devote to their studies versus wasting their time watching TV or doing other stuff. Anybody have any guesses on what they find on the people who were enrolled in an exercise program versus those who weren't? Please.
The people that exercise more are lacking more of those efforts.
Okay, so your idea here is that if you exercise more, you're going to have less good outcomes along these lines. Oh, okay, good. I was like, how am I going to steer her away? Okay, good. And why would that be?
Because if you're using the analogy of willpower being a muscle, I feel like exercising plays.
That's exactly right. That when you have to build in a behavior like exercise into your daily routines, it takes willpower to get yourself to go to the gym and to stay on task with that. But by the process of doing that, your willpower becomes stronger, and when you have good willpower in one aspect of your life, it strengthens the willpower that you have for all of these other aspects of your life, even though these other aspects of your life are not directly related to the key behavior. So incorporating one behavior that requires self-regulatory strength, willpower, into your life increases self-regulatory strength in other areas of your life. We've done some research looking at student athletes and performing arts students. Anybody do either of those? Okay, so would anybody be willing to share with me during the semester or during the time of the year when you either are rehearsing for the show or have a lot of practices for the sport, what happens to your academic performance? Anybody willing to share? Please.
Well, so during the season, I'm more likely to do well in my academics because they require it, and it gives my concentration because apparently exercise has been shown to improve your concentration levels.
Sure enough, yeah, that's exactly right. That when you, so it sounds like that has been your experience as well, that when you are involved in something, your academic performance is strengthened, and it's consistent with the research on the topic that because you're having to make it to practices on a regular basis, and you're having to do a lot of time, you know, if you're a performing arts student, you might have to be learning a lot of lines or doing other things. All of those things require willpower. They require you to have your willpower really strong. And if your willpower is strong in one aspect of your life, it becomes stronger in the other aspects of your life. It's like this general construct that kind of touches everything. So here's a researcher who studied this, Todd Heatherton. He says, when you learn to force yourself to go to the gym or start your homework or eat a salad instead of a hamburger, part of what's happening is that you're changing how you think. People get better at regulating their impulses. They learn how to distract themselves from temptations. And once you've gotten into that willpower groove, your brain is practiced at helping you focus on a goal. So the idea here is that if you can get in the habit of exercising, of getting up in the morning and doing a run or after school, whatever works for you, or if you can get in the habit of making better choices, choosing a salad versus the French fries for lunch, that is strengthening your willpower in one domain of life, and then your willpower becomes strengthened across all domains so that you can be better at focusing your attention on your work instead of being lured away by social media, or you can spend a little bit more time in the library or studying for your class because your willpower is already strong based on everything else that you have. So the second way to build willpower is to find opportunities to develop willpower in your everyday behaviors. It's those small opportunities where you spend a little bit more time studying, you can do a couple extra minutes, or you spend a little bit more time exercising. Those are the things that are strengthening that willpower muscle so that you then have more willpower for any other task that you might be doing in the long run. The only caveat is that on the days when you have something really big coming up, so the day of a performance or the day when you're going to have to give a big presentation for a class or something, that's a day when you want to go easy on everything else because you want to preserve all of your willpower in the short term so that you can dedicate it to that big presentation that's coming up a little bit later on. Check the time here. So we're at 2:19. So I do have a little bit more material, but I'd also be happy to, this is as far as we got in the morning, so I'd also be happy to answer any other questions, or I don't know if there's other logistical things that you need to take care of. So otherwise I can keep going. If anybody answer questions about this or watch you or St. Louis. All right. Okay. All right, let's see what else I've got here. Okay, how many people here keep a to-do list? Like you have a list. Okay, keep your hand up if you're always able to accomplish everything on your list. Okay, so we've got 2 people, and you're sort of very slowly drawing your hand out. Okay, so for those of you who feel like you're usually able to accomplish most of the things on your to-do list, what's your secret? Because it seems like most people, their hands went immediately down when asked.
I keep like a very regimented schedule because I have slight OCD, so like I have to get myself in like a mental pattern. And I'm a dancer, so I dance a lot. So it's like if I get out of my routine, everything just starts falling apart. So I have to keep a to-do list to help me like check everything off. And I always try and make sure that everything is like spaced out evenly so it gets done at least by deadlines.
Excellent. You use 2 incredibly important words there. The first is schedule, and the second is deadlines. And when researchers have looked at the likelihood that people complete the items on their to-do list, they find that that is the solution. That in order to maintain or to get through all of the items on your to-do list, you have a schedule and you stick to it because you have deadlines that you enforce. So one of the most important things that we can do that goes along with our ability to build willpower is setting deadlines, having actual things. So my philosophy is that a to-do list is just a wish list unless each of those items has a particular deadline attached to it. Because you might say, okay, I've got to study for this test, write a paper for this, then I've got to go run these errands. But if you attach deadlines to those things and say, okay, at 4 o'clock I'm going to do this, from 4 to 5 I'm going to do this, then from 5 to 5:30 I'm going to take a break, then from 5:30 to 6:30 I do this other thing, then if you've told yourself, okay, you only have an hour, then it creates a sense of urgency. That if you know that you only allowed yourself an hour to write a paper that's due tomorrow, then if by 30 minutes into it you're not at least halfway done, then you realize that you really have to pick up the pace before you move on to your next thing. So one of the things that we can do to increase the likelihood that we accomplish all of our items on our to-do list is to set deadlines and do our best to achieve. That's something really important. That's another way to increase your accountability. All right, how many people multitask and say that's a way that I increase my efficiency? You know, I'll watch TV, I'll be like this guy, I'm driving on the phone, checking email, or I'm driving in the car, checking email on the phone, I've got an earpiece and having a little breakfast. Who thinks that that is effective, that it increases your efficiency? Might as well do multiple things at the same time. Who says, no, that's actually going to slow you down, that's going to be, okay, good, well, we have an enthusiastic person over here. All right, you know, I want to illustrate this for you with the following task. So you'll see that there's all these shapes on here. What I want you to do is silently to yourself count the total number of circles there are and count the number of triangles. So you should have two numbers, one for the number of circles, one for the number of triangles. I'm going to call on somebody. When you have it, raise your hand. Anybody have it? Who haven't we heard of? Can you tell us in the back? 10 and 10. Did everybody get that? Okay. Can I ask you, what was the method by which you arrived at that answer? You know, there are a couple different ways that you could have counted these to get the two numbers. Can you tell us what you did?
I just counted pairs. Like, I counted a pair of circle and triangle.
So it sounds like you did like 2 and then 2 and then 2 and then 2. So you had 2 running lists at the same time?
Yeah, because you said that we can't multitask, so I tried to multitask by pairing.
Okay. So my question is, did you go like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 for the circles and then go back 2, 4, 6, or you actually were like 1, 2, 1, 2, so you're sort of tucking away a number for circles, number for triangles?
I was assuming that the numbers were probably going to be close and there would only be like one left over because it looked like they were even. And when I counted them in pairs, they came out to be 10.
Oh, okay. I've never had anybody try it that way. So you were able to sort of eyeball it and figure that they were going to be pretty close. How about somebody else who had an approach of how you counted these? Can you tell us?
I was also trying to do the multitasking thing. So I would count like 3 of circles, 3 of triangles, and then keep doing that.
Interesting. Okay. Did anybody count all the circles and then count all the triangles? Okay, that's usually how people do it. Now, if we had measured your reaction time, who do you think did it faster? The people who counted all of one, then all of the other one, or people who were actually keeping 2 lists simultaneously? Yeah, so when we study this, we find reliably that there's a whopping difference between people who take those approaches, that the people who do all of one and then all of the other do it way faster and with much higher accuracy. Because really these are 2 separate tasks. So here's what we know about attention. It's a limited resource. We have to be selective about where we place it. And it functions like a spotlight. So it can only be allocated to one thing at a time, which means that if you are on the phone and you're driving, you might think that you're doing both of those at the same time, but ultimately, does multitasking exist? No. Though at best, all that we can do is switch really quickly between one activity and another, but we cannot actually simultaneously hold 2 separate tasks in our head at the same time. And so if you think that you're multitasking, it's actually an illusion. It's kind of like an animator's flip book, where when they flip it, it looks like this little man here is running because the pages are going one after the other so quickly that it looks like continuous motion. But actually, these are individual, separate pieces of paper here. It's the same thing when we're trying to do 2 things at the same time. If you're trying to watch TV and study something at the same time, you have to switch back and forth, and that's where it's going to both slow you down and also increase the likelihood that you're going to make errors. So this is important because if you're going to study, if you've got other stuff that you've got to do, it's really important to place breaks in between different tasks, not in the middle of one, because it takes extra time to sort of ramp yourself back up and figure out where you were before you keep going. So does multitasking exist? It absolutely does not exist. It might feel like it because you're switching back and forth so quickly, but there's still a switch cost that is associated with that will both slow you down in the long run and also increase the likelihood that you will make errors. That's especially the case when you're driving. That's often what's associated with a lot of teenage car accidents, is that people are talking to other people, they're on the phone, they're doing other stuff that's taking their attention away from the road. So the fourth and final way to build willpower, do your tasks one at a time, because there is no such thing as multitasking. Turn off your phone and your email to prevent switch costs. Who keeps their email open while they're reading a book or doing homework or other stuff? I mean, I do it all the time, right? But it's gonna slow us down because it's redirecting our attention from what we should be doing and putting it somewhere else. And it's not just that it's adding the time of checking the email, it's adding the switch cost, the amount of time it takes to go from one activity to another. That is an additional cost over and above doing the two things one after the other. Question back here.
What about listening to music? Because that's like a passive action while you're at.
It's a great activity, or it's a great question, and it's also a great activity. So it's only going to be a switch cost if it's actually consuming your attention, consuming cognitive resources. So people have asked, what about if I'm tying my shoe or if I'm doing some other behavior that is automatic? That is actually not going to be a problem because it's not requiring your attention. You're not having to take that spotlight and actually direct it over to something. Now, I have seen people who listen to music and they're rocking out to it and they're having a great time. Well, that's going to be a problem because that's actually taking your attention away from the study. But if you just have it on in the background and it's not actually requiring attentional resources, then yeah, it's fine. Yeah, for sure. Did you have a question? Okay, yeah, if it's an automatic behavior, it's not going to require attention.
Does it allow you to spread out the expenditure of willpower if you're doing something? Can you couple something that you enjoy with something that you're dreading in order to make it so it takes less willpower to persist through?
Oh, I see. Well, so this is slightly related. There is some. So this is within the domain of positive emotions. We know there's this theory called the broaden and build theory of positive emotions, and the idea is that when we put ourselves in a good mood, it enhances our ability to perform some cognitive tasks. So if you have some dreadful tasks, you can sort of soften the blow, but also if you have, say, a big paper that you have to write for a class that you're not really enthusiastic about or that you think is going to be really challenging, if you can do something like listen to your favorite music or eat a piece of chocolate or do something enjoyable, that positive mood actually expands your cognitive resources and positions you, even at the level of our brains, to do better on that task. So in that way, probably what you need more than anything is a little bit of a boost of motivation, and positive emotions can be very effective in that way. Really good questions. Any other questions? All right.
It's like,
oh, go ahead.
willpower muscles, like a muscle up, is there a certain point where you can't make it any stronger?
Oh, I think that it's one of those things where it's really been shown just, you can keep building it, There's probably